Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go by the digital clocks. It is 10 o'clock rather than what it says by the clock in the room. Can I welcome you all to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee? We are one of 3 area-based planning committees of Dorset Council. Can I just check, can everybody hear me okay? Thank you. Yeah, we have an issue with no desk microphones this morning. We have room microphones for the live feed, but so everyone that speaks today, can they please make sure you speak slowly, loud and clear so that everybody can hear you? Thank you. So for the benefit of the members of the public who are very welcome here this morning, my name is Tony Coombs and I'm the chairman of the Planning Committee. If I could introduce to you the officers we have as today. If I start at this end, we have Megan Rochester, who is our committee support officer, Bill Crowther, who is our legal support, Anna Lee, head of service, Ursula Fay, who is the case officer for the Knoll House application, and Helen Lilly, who is our landscape officer. Sorry, Helen, senior moment there, and Steve Savage from Highways. The officer for the third and fourth applications are introduced when we get to those applications. I would also like to thank the officers behind the scenes who are making today possible. I'm very pleased to welcome you as members of the public to our meetings to listen to the debate and the decisions that we make here today, and that you have an opportunity to address us directly, but in accordance with our procedures, which are found on the website. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and a copy of the recording will be available on the website afterwards, and by attending this meeting you are consenting to be filmed. Can you please make sure that all electronic devices are either switched off or turned to silent, and also be aware of various trip hazards around the room. So if I move on to the agenda now, item 1 is apologies for absence. Megan, do we have any apologies for absence?
So we've received apologies for absence from councillors Bill Trite and Julie Robinson.
Thank you. Moving on to declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination. I'm going to ask Phil to make a small statement about the membership of the National Trust. And then following that, if people need to say anything, please raise your hand. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. So the National Trust owns land which is adjacent to the application site for the first application you're considering today. I'm saying this because it's like or possible that some members of the committee are members of the National Trust, and in which case my advice would be that you should declare that in a moment, and also state whether or not you're in a position of control or management of the trust. If you're an ordinary member, so not in a position of control or management, my advice is that it will be appropriate for you to take part and vote in the item as normal, but you should just make the declaration for transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there any declarations of interest?
If possible, become likely.
Okay. Are they all in relation to the National Trust?
Yes.
Are there any that aren't in relation to the National Trust? Fine. So apart from Mike Dyer, every other member of the committee has declared membership of the National Trust.
So could you all confirm that you're not in a position of management and control by a show of hands? So show of hands that not.
Yeah. Okay. That was a quick way around of doing it. Okay, thank you for that. The minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December have been circulated to members in advance and also published on the website. Are you happy that I sign them as an accurate copy of that meeting? Thank you. Moving on to public participation, can I remind members of the public that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting, and only those who have registered to speak will be allowed to address us today. The first 3 members of the public, including any community or amenity group who have registered to speak for and against the application, including the applicant or their representative, up to a maximum of 6, will be invited to address us. If the applicant or their representative registers to speak, then only the first 2 members of the public who wish to speak for the application may address the committee. MPs need to register in the same way and will count as one of the 6 speakers. Town and parish councils and ward members of Dorset Council who are not members of the committee who wish to address us will be allowed to speak, provided they have given due notice. All requests have to be registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 a.m. on Monday this week. And each speaker will be strictly limited to 3 minutes. So we have 4 planning applications before us today. Have there been any requests for deferral or withdrawal, please?
No, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The background information relating to the applications before us has been available for inspection by members before the meeting, covering consultations, objections and representations, as well as the East Dorset and Purbeck local plans and the council's related policies. For each application, I will invite the case officer to introduce the item. Members of the public, planning agents, applicants and town and parish councils who have registered to speak will be allowed to address us in the following order: public against the application, public in support, the applicant or agent, the town or parish council, and then the local member. Following the public participation of every item, I will then ask the officers if there are any salient points that they wish to clarify. I will then turn to the members of the committee for questions and debate. In order to run the meeting smoothly, may I request that members of the committee direct any remarks and questions through myself, and I will invite you to speak in turn. At the end of the debate, I will take a vote, the vote by a show of hands, and the voting detail will only be recorded in the minutes if 3 or 4 members make the necessary request. So we will now move on to the first of the applications, and that's agenda item 6, PFUL 2022 06840, the Knoll House Hotel, Ferry Road, Studland. And that's redevelopment of the existing hotel to provide new tourist accommodation, including 30 hotel bedrooms, apartment and villa accommodation, and associated leisure and dining facilities. Ursula is going to be taking us through this one. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so there's just firstly some updates to the officer report. So regarding floor space, as stated in the committee report, the gross external area for the development is 15,813 square metres. And just so members are aware and can compare, we now have the gross internal area as well, as calculated by the council's civil team, which is 14,836 square metres. And regarding parking, an update, the extent of existing parking at the site identified in 2018 was 79 spaces, and the applicants carried out a further study for this application and identified an additional 7 spaces on the existing site. So that is now increasing to 86 spaces. Regarding economic benefits, an update to page 55, which should say £65 million spent on construction and 9.4 million in wages. And just an update as well on policy E8, Dorset Heathlands of the emerging Purbeck local plan. And this is relevant to the application, but the policy team have said it should not be given significant weight in the decision-making process in any way. And this policy continues the approach, the current policy approach in policy DH of the Purbeck local plan and in the Dorset Heathlands SPD. So there's no material change in the policy proposed in the forthcoming Purbeck local plan. An update on a further response from the natural environment team that's been received. That they have confirmed that the applicant to date has not completed a biodiversity plan through our protocol for the current application. And they've said the effects on nightjar are not known. There are concerns around the accuracy of the baseline habitat assessment, particularly the classification of some grassland to the south of the hotel as dry acid grassland. And they've said that the 38.5% increase in habitat units, which has been identified within that application, should be viewed with caution and not given substantial weight in decision making. And that the potential effects on lowland dry acid grassland are unknown, and mitigation is not currently described in the level of detail sufficient to provide confidence it is appropriate and achievable. And that is the official position which was sent in by the Natural Environment team I am aware the applicant has been working since then with the Natural Environment team. However, we haven't got any further update from them at this time. And so regarding some further information we've had from the applicant a couple of days ago, they have advised they would be potentially agreeable to an amendment or restriction of the proposal to use Class 1 C1 hotels. Currently, the proposal is a mixture of use classes C1 hotels and C3 dwelling houses. They would also be willing to accept a conditional obligation restricting cats and dogs. They also, as part of that, could remove the dog facilities at the sites, but still deliver the woodland walk. And they would continue to deliver mire restoration. As it is coming in 2 days before this committee, these amendments have not been formalised, for example, through an amended application form or consulted on, and officers have advised you this would be required to be able to consider those amendments, particularly the change to C1. And it's unknown whether the assessment amendments would satisfy Natural England or result in a different outcome for the appropriate assessment. And further, the amendments would not resolve the landscape concerns. So the recommendation for refusal due to impacts on the AONB and the Heritage Coast would remain. And I do have one further update this morning that has just come in 8 minutes before the meeting. So yes, it's an email from National Trust, and they have seen a drawing submitted by the applicants with a drainage strategy, and they are happy that that would redirect surface water from discharging into the Pipley Swamp, and when available they would want to see a complete updated drainage strategy which would include volume flows and impact assessment on the Studland and Goslington Heath SSSI, through which the discharge would flow nearer the final discharge into the sea. So moving to the presentation, Knoll House Hotel is located in the Studland area of Purbeck. It's outside of the settlement boundary and accessed from Ferry Road, north of Studland. This is the location plan, which shows the application site in red, stroke purple, because there's also a blue line which is showing land which is in the control of the applicant and understood to be leased from the National Trust. So this is the application site, and then around is blue land which is in the control of the applicant. And I'll just point out to members as well the National Trust car park, which you may be familiar with. This is the existing block plan of the existing hotel. I would just point members to there being quite a lot of variation in orientation, not a lot of variation, but some variation in orientation of the plan submitted. So where north is not to the top, I've tried to put a north arrow to show which way it is. This is the main hotel building, and then there's a spa and swimming pool over here, and various other blocks of accommodation and small ancillary buildings. And you can see the topography of the site here. The hotel is located on top of a hill or knoll, and it falls away very steeply to the west, and along Ferry Road it climbs, and the high point along Ferry Road being in front of the main part of the hotel. Looking at the constraints at site, the whole of the site and surrounding areas are within the Dorset AONB, and the AONB team and Natural England have both raised concerns about the impacts on the AONB. And also note the AONB is a dark sky zone, so in addition to visual impacts. There are concerns about the impacts from lighting and the extensive glazing. The site is also within the Dorset Heritage Coast, and this is considered to have similar impacts on this as on the AONB. The site is about 60 metres from the Dorset Heathlands SPA / Dorset Heaths SAC, and there are impacts on recreational pressures and air quality identified. Also, approximately 360 metres from the Solent and Dorset Coast SPA, Poole Harbour, there's recreational pressures identified on this, but no impacts identified on water quality. However, with the Dorset Heathlands SAC, there is a potential water quality issue. There was a water quality issue with the initial drainage proposal. The applicant's been working to resolve this, but as yet we have not had a drainage proposal which has been considered acceptable by the flood authority to discharge into a different point, and so the precautionary principle means that at the moment we're not ruling out a potential water quality issue. This slide is showing the heritage assets near the site. There are two pillboxes in what are currently the grounds of Knoll House, and there have been no harm to these. There are also two bowl barrows to the south, and again, no harm identified to these. Knoll House itself is considered to be an unlisted heritage asset, and there would be less than substantial harm to this. This slide is showing the protected trees on the site. All of these trees are shown to be retained. Looking at rights of way near the site, on this slide, the rights of way is shown in yellow. So there's a bridleway along Ferry Road, and there's another one in a field to the south of the site. There's also a lot of open access land in the vicinity of the site, with Goslington Heath located to the west. Now to look at some photos of the site. This is showing the central facade. It's proposed to retain the facade only of the site and demolish the rest of the buildings. Note the lantern here, which would be lost, which is part of the reason why there's been less than substantial harm identified. Travelling north along Ferry Road, topography falls away, as you can see in this picture. It falls away fairly quickly, and the hotel building currently steps down in line with the topography. When viewed from the south, there's a less steep incline. This is showing that view, and officers consider that at the moment the character of the hotel is akin to a country house hotel. Within the site itself, the development is more piecemeal. Currently the view from the entrance has little impact. There's an existing swimming pool which isn't offering, which is, I think, like the rest of the hotel, it is in need of upgrading, and it's not offering a particularly attractive proposition at the moment. There's also, like I said, a number of other accommodation blocks, such as this one. Some of those are, I think mainly those are used for staff accommodation at the moment. And then this photo shows the view into the site from the west. So this is from the high point of the site, and as you can see, in the centre of that high point, there's very little development built form at the moment. Then looking across Ferry Road, Here you can see there's some land which is used by the hotel with leisure uses and a footpath which leads down to the beach. To the south, we have the public rights of way, and these two photos are showing views from that public right of way, which has a direct view into the hotel with very minimal or no screening in place at the moment. And then from vantage points, there are several vantage points in the countryside within the heathlands as well as hills to the south. This is showing one of them, and there's more views from the surroundings when I present the landscape and visual impact assessment details. So in terms of the planning history on this site, before I show the current proposal, I've got two slides which are showing the previous proposal as this is referenced. It's referenced in the application and is a material consideration. This proposal was submitted in 2018 and it came to this committee in February 2022. This is showing the site plan that was proposed at that time, which I generally would refer to as the previous scheme. And this is indicating the extent of built form, scale and massing that was proposed previously. And I note the tallest ridgeline for the blocks behind the hotel was approximately 7.1 metres above the main hotel building. And these are just showing some key elevations from 2018. This is the street elevation to Ferry Road. And this is the southern elevation, which was towards the open countryside. Now to go through the proposal. Note that I've updated the floor space here because now we have the gross internal area floor space for all schemes existing, the previous review scheme and the current proposal. So I've updated that so that members can more easily compare them. Note that this application, as the last previous scheme, proposes dwelling houses which fall within use class C3. The description of development does reference tourist accommodation, and so these could be conditioned and restricted to holiday use only. And on this basis, there would be no requirement to make contribution to affordable housing. However, C3 dwelling houses are not permitted within 400 metres of the Dorset Heathlands. And I think legal can answer any detailed questions members have about this later, but the advice we've had is that each C3 dwelling created under this proposal would be a separate planning unit, and that there's a number of complexities around conditions and obligations which could be intended to mitigate the potential impacts and the enforcement of these. So, yeah, there's concerns about the introduction of C3 dwellings at this site and how that could be mitigated for impacts on the heathlands. And the vast majority of the development is proposed, the existing scheme is proposed for demolition. So only the facade, the central facade of the hotel would be retained. And this is showing the proposal. Just go around and show some of the various components. This is the main hotel area with 30 bedrooms and an attached restaurant. There's also 18 apartments in this area, which can be accessed through the hotel or via their own door. And behind this, there are 23 bedroom, 3-storey villas in a curved terrace. There's an internal garden area between these, which will be raised up above existing ground levels. There's a further 6 2-bedroom, 2-storey villas in this location. And then there is over here a spa with indoor and outdoor swimming pools, treatment rooms, cafe, and much better facilities, or much greater and more attractive facilities than the existing. In terms of the access, the vehicular access is the same as existing from Ferry Road. Travelling into the site, there's a drop-off area and disabled parking. which could be used by the minibuses that are proposed, and which would essentially travel staff into the site and drop off with guests. Then moving along, there is here a 2-storey tiered parking area. And then there's a ramp here which goes down to a lower level. And then there's an access road leading around the back of the site, which is sunken with retaining walls. Also, there's a retaining wall along the northern edge of the site along here. I'd also draw members' attention to this semicircular area of land to the south, which is joining the open countryside. We don't have a lot of details on this area. However, it's understood the intention is to reprofile the land here. I'm now going to take you through each block which is proposed. So they are all unique, and I found it most helpful to look at the buildings from the top down. So that's the way that I'm going to present them. And just note the applicants helpfully provided some key plans which show which block we are looking at. And a feature of the proposal is the use of green roofs. There's a large number of green use roofs proposed across the site. There are also some solar panels which are intended to be placed in areas which might have the least visibility from viewpoints. Some other parts of the roofs are standing seam zinc roofs. And in response to concerns from the AONB team about potential for reflectivity of this material, the applicant has said that pre-weathered zinc could be used. There's also been some discussions about the reflectivity of PV panels and potential other options. However, as it stands, the application still includes solar PV panels. Moving down, this is the first floor, so at the top of the hotel and apartment buildings. The hotel bedrooms are in the slightly darker blue in the centre, with the apartments in a lighter blue. In white, we can see balconies. And this is also the upper restaurant, which has its own kitchen and an outdoor terrace. And at the ground floor of the hotel, here's the entrance lobby and the reception. This is the main restaurant with another kitchen. There's also an external restaurant pod and various seating areas outside. And more hotel bedrooms and apartments. Due to the topography, the northern end of this building is elevated, so there's another floor below. And so you can see here additional story to the north, with additional hotel bedrooms and apartments within that. There's also this is an entrance here which serves the apartments, and there's also a basement prep kitchen for the restaurants. Below this, there is another basement area to the north of the building. And this is where the access road leads that goes around the back of the site. And this provides servicing of the hotel, laundry, waste, and the service yard. So this, just to make members aware, this is the extent of the hotel above. So these areas are underground, but with landscaping on top. This is showing the elevations for the hotel and apartments. So the existing facade is retained in the centre, and there's new cladding and it's upgraded with new fenestration and roof coverings. Also proposed to keep the existing ironstone columns. Then we have the restaurant, which is predominantly glazed with a glazed link. Then hotel and apartment rooms also predominantly glazed and with glazed balconies. The north elevation here faces out to the site towards woodland. It does rely upon this woodland for screening and mitigation. And I would note that during the course of the application, the apartment elevation element of the apartment element of this building was reduced in height. So it was initially 4 stories and it's been reduced to 3 stories, which has resulted in a reduction in 4 apartments. And this slide is showing the front elevation Ferry Road compared to the existing hotel. So currently the historic core of the hotel is quite prominent, and the lantern which is above does add to this. As you can see the topography, I think, of the Ferry Road in quite well in this overlay. So the historic core is elevated, and generally as the topography falls down, the buildings on either side are stepping down with it. The new hotel has got three distinct elements. So the retained facade in the middle, then there's the restaurant, which is kind of a predominantly glazed building, and then rows of hotel rooms to the north. And these are slightly taller, and particularly the hotel rooms do tend to dominate the central elements. Further, I think the proposal, the roof line in terms of the proposal actually increases either side of the core, and then it stays continuous regardless of the topography. So it will be particularly to the northern end much more dominant in the street scene when you're approaching from the north along Ferry Road. I'd also note in this overlay the spa building, which we're moving to next. This is likewise elevated in comparison to the existing buildings. And this is the roof of the spa building. It's a very unique design, as you'll see in the elevations. And here's the outdoor pool and some terraced areas. And this is the countryside here. The countryside is located to the south with the field with the right of way through it. So the spa is single story, however, it is quite a tall building for a single story building, and it's higher than the existing single story buildings. In part, this is partly due to the raising of ground levels and the kind of more spacious area for the swimming pool and poolside areas. And out there's the terrace and the outdoor patio. The ground levels would be slightly raised. There's also a jacuzzi and outdoor pool. Note this is a protected tree being retained adjacent to the swimming pool, and the swimming pool and jacuzzi will be built on top of the existing lands that's there. This is the spa basement, which has got some treatment rooms, a gym, and some plant rooms for the swimming pool. There's also here access to the lower deck of the car park. And these elevations are showing the unique design of the spa building. Of all the buildings that are proposed, this one appears to be particularly innovative. And there's the use of a sloped green roof, which is intended to blend into the countryside, and that's quite effective. And the inclusion of the outdoor seating area does reduce this somewhat. In terms of the southern elevation towards the countryside, this is introducing some interaction between the hotel use and the field to the south that isn't there at present with the existing situation. So customers will be able to enjoy views from the terrace, jacuzzi and swimming pool. I'd also point out to members the use of slatted panels to the glass here, in front of the glass here, which is intended to reduce light and glare arising from these windows. So looking at the spa building, looking towards Ferry Road, is predominantly glass panels. These are some sections of the spa. You can see here where they are. This is a section through the Ferry Road here, and the parking areas here through this, and this is a section at the countryside. It's over here, and then towards the hotel building is over this way. looking at the villa floor plans now. So this is the 3-storey villas in the curved terrace, and this is the 2-storey villas in a terrace to the south. There is a mixture of green roofs and zinc with solar panels on. You can see the solar panels on individual villas along this terrace. And the 3-storey villas have master bedrooms at the top with balconies. At the first floor level is where all of the living accommodation is found, also with balconies. And then at ground floor, there's additional bedrooms. And below that, there is a basement to the north of the villas, which provides some basement car parking. And that's accessed via the internal access road that I talked about earlier. So for the south elevation, this is facing towards the countryside. It's quite a striking design with aluminium surrounds to each dwelling. And the majority is glazed, but there is less glazing on these than some of the other buildings. And there's some use of timber panels and Purbeck stone as well. And there's glazing for the balcony balustrades. And note you can see the 3-storey villa buildings behind. And the elevation of this one being clad in, facing south, is clad in zinc. And these are the elevations for the 3-storey dwellings. These are located in the most elevated part of the site, which is an area where there's fewer buildings and they're predominantly low level at present. And there are concerns from the AONB team and Natural England and our landscape officer regarding the height of these proposed villas. And it is showing the 2 tiers of parking that's proposed. Location is not shown on the key plan, so I've marked it with a star. These are right on these are close to the edge of the site, and there's only a small line of landscaping which is shown around the edge for mitigation. And there is a wall above the upper story of the car park, which would be approximately 1 metre above the floor level of the car park there, with average cars being approximately 1.5 metres in height. It's possible that cars would be visible over the top. And this is the southern elevation, which shows how the parking would interact with countryside to the south. So this is the wall that is proposed, shown in green. This is referenced as being a green wall, but we have limited details about this. The design access statement does reference a wall with climbing plants. And the sections provided here show that the wall is approximately 4.4 metres high at the tallest point. And to mitigate the height of the wall, it's proposed to reprofile land to the south and build it up into a bund, which would hide some of the wall. And then to the west, which is facing towards the woodlands, there are the wall extends here with Purbeck rubble stone and gaps of ventilation. This is facing woodland and would not be visible with the current woodland in place, as long as that's retained. But regarding all of the use of woodland that's existing as mitigation, there is actually a woodland management plan, which is part of the proposal. And this would set out plans to reduce a significant number of trees and do some replanting around the site. And I think there are some concerns about what the impacts will be on that in terms of the use of that woodland as mitigation. And here's some more images which show car parking, tiered car parking, which has been provided. So moving back to the site plans now that I've showed the various buildings and elements, and this is showing again, how they're all accommodated in their interactions. There are quite a lot of earthworks and level changes proposed, and this plan does identify some of those, some level points and what they would be before and after the proposed development, but there are still quite a lot of questions about this, I think, particularly in terms of this area of land, which is adjoining open countryside, and we've got very little information really about what's proposed for this reprofiling across this area. And this is showing the site plan at the lower ground strip basement level. And this is some site sections for the whole of the site. So AA is the front elevation, and this has the existing hotel outline is shown in dotted blue line, and the existing ground levels are shown through a black dotted line. So the existing hotel, the existing centre of the hotel is 7.6 metres above existing ground levels. The ground's actually going to be lowered to create a stepped entrance and a patio area. And then moving north along this, as the ground falls away, and the existing hotel has a height of 8.9 metres, and the new hotel would increase by 1.7 metres. So that's in this area. And then moving further to the north, the northern wing of the existing hotel is 8.2 metres, and a new building would increase this by 4.3. There's also, you can see here, the service area which adjoins the site boundary, although this is set back, and it's likely to be screened from Ferry Road. Note that the villas are behind this elevation, but they're not actually shown on the section, although they would be above the main hotel building and situated on higher ground. However, they would be very limited visibility of them from Ferry Road. For most of Ferry Road, the main hotel building would block views of those villas, but there may be some views of them from the entrance of the site. So section BB is showing the rear of the hotel. So this is within the site, looking at the back of the main hotel and apartment building, and a section to the spa. CC and DD, I think, are quite good for showing the relationship between the hotel and then the 3-storey villas. So this is to the north edge of the site. And then this is the central section of the hotel, the 3-storey villas behind. And this is showing here some earthworks which are to fill in and raise the levels within the centre of the site. Within section DD, the height here in terms of the difference between central hotel reception area of the hotel and the villas would be approximately 5.5 metres above. So it is reduced on the previous scheme. I'd also draw members' attention to the internal access road to the back of the site, which you can see here recessed at a lower level. Then we have some more site sections. This is section EE. This shows the internal view from the site within the site at the access looking towards the restaurant. And section FF is showing a section through the spa, and you can see the tiered parking here, and existing buildings and land levels are shown in blue. And in section GG, this is within the site looking towards the 3-storey villas. And I think here you can see the maximum extent of a wall that's proposed to enclose the service yard and the hotel basement area adjacent to the northern edge of the site. This is facing towards woodlands, and the plans are showing this wall being approximately 6.7 metres in height. And looking at the materials that are proposed, we've had a submission about how these how these these are identified on all of the elevations, and we've also got some pictures that have been sent in with some precedents. So the main materials would be timber cladding, grey aluminium, Purbeck stone, and standing seam zinc. And there's also, as I said, a large use of green roofs. This is a landscape strategy plan. This was provided at quite a late stage following some comments from consultees. Landscaping is not a reserved matter, but this is the only landscaping plan that we've got at the moment, and there are no details being provided at the moment. And I'd note the plan does not extend to the southern part of the site, so it is excluding the semicircle area that I pointed to previously. It does also seem potentially to include a small strip of land along here next to the hotel service basement as well. And generally, consultees have reviewed this strategy and have found the level of detail in the proposals to be unsatisfactory. So looking at the landscape and visual impact assessment, there have been assessments carried out for key viewpoints from which the hotel can be seen. And got some slides which show those. A series of views from within the LVI, Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment. So the views themselves are in the large pictures, and then I have zoomed in on the Noel House Hotel so that members can see this aspect more closely. Being aware that obviously you would need to refer to the document itself to see the images at the size intended. So this is the existing view from a footpath at Blackdown Mount. And this is a photo montage that's been submitted to show hotel might look like. There have been quite a lot of concerns from statutory consultees and our landscape team about the poor resolution and poor rendering of photo montages. And also the images do show the woodlands, the rear of the hotel as is, and as providing screening. However, as I mentioned, the woodland management plan will remove quite a lot of trees from this area. This is showing the baseline view from Addlestone Rock. And this is the photo montage view. And this is showing the baseline view from Studland Hill. So the Noel House Hotel is located centrally in this image. And then this is the photo montage view. This is an example of where it's quite difficult to see the proposal. And I think the applicant would respond to that, to the effect that the views are at a resolution which is viewable by the human eye. However, consultees haven't accepted the landscape and visual impact assessment, and it's not felt that it adequately represents some elements of the proposal, particularly the rendering and elements which are prone to glare, such as solar panels, glazing, and parked cars. Further, we've got a view from Ballard Down. This is the photo montage from that area. I think this one does show the scale and bulk of the proposal, and you can see there's the long terrace of 3-storey villas, which appear quite prominently from this view. And looking at some closer views, so the top is viewpoint 2 from the landscape and visual impact assessment. This doesn't have a photo montage of this view included, but the provided CGI below shows the proposal from a similar angle, and it's noted the 3-storey dwellings here are visible above the closer 2-storey dwellings. This is the spa building, and the swimming pool will be over here, outdoor swimming pool, and this is the car park area. And this is another view that's been provided from the southern public right of way with a CGI, and this is showing this does show the increased scale and bulk of the spa building and of the hotel behind when seen from this angle. And it does show how there will be more of a relationship between the spa building and the field, and also a bit more relationship between these dwellings and the field with balconies overlooking it. Also note the removal of trees here along the western boundary and the car parking area. Looking at what's proposed for lighting, and following concerns, the applicant has submitted some extra information about lighting and made some changes to and pointed out elements which could help to reduce light spill. They've said that external glazing could be specified with an appropriate visible light transmittance factor to reduce light spill. And there's also reference to areas of glazing being broken up with solid panels, as you can see an example of this in the restaurant, where we've got panels and then glazing at the upper story. There's also reference, and this is a picture, a precedent of a reduction in glazing. Another measure that's being proposed to be used is the slatted screens, as I pointed out on the spa building, and these are some precedents examples of that. And in terms of the dwellings, villas, this is showing some of the measures here, and I think it's worth pointing out the use of extending the roof out over the elevation of the dwelling, so that this prevents some light from spilling up into the sky. And it's also proposed to include blackout blinds to the windows. Looking at the proposal in terms of the trees on the sites, the loss of trees at the site is very similar to the previous application, and officers would consider that, as previously, the loss of those trees would be acceptable on its own. However, the current application includes significant amounts of earthworks, and our tree officer is not happy that those earthworks have been adequately accounted for in the submitted arboricultural information, and she's not confident that the trees that are proposed to be retained would thrive in the long term. And so that is considered that there isn't enough evidence to show that the proposed trees would thrive, and so that's recommended as a reason for refusal. Now looking at the economic benefits of the proposal, I think officers would advise the economic benefits are significant. The hotel as present is considered that investment would greatly benefit that hotel. In terms of the employment that would benefit from, that would result from this, there would be a move away from seasonal employment towards longer term employment, which would result in more skilled roles and better career progression, and also a significant increase in the number of employees at the hotel. So, and you can see the increases here in terms of the number of employees now and in the future, both in terms of total numbers and the full-time equivalents. And this slide is showing the localised economic impacts as submitted within the environmental statement. And as I've said, the economic benefits are considered significant. Now looking at the ecology and habitat sites, this is showing the identified ecological features at the site and in the surrounding area. that's within control of the applicant. So the NET team had some concerns about the identification because the previous 2018 ecological impact assessment identified quite a lot of lowland acid grassland within the ownership of the hotel, and this wasn't identified in the recent studies. Also, some concern that the applicant had not gone through the biodiversity protocol for this proposal, and it was considered that the details of mitigation were insufficient. But as this shows, there is a considerable increase in the extent of the site that would have habitat due to the creation of green roofs. Whether there are concerns about this area again to the south, because it's considered that this should be identified as lowland acid grassland, which is a priority habitat. However, as there's going to be reprofiling works in this area, it's currently unknown what the effects might be in terms of how much habitat might be lost, and whether the habitat proposed to be retained could be successfully retained. And that is actually, the NET team said that's quite a big factor in calculating the biodiversity net gain. But at the moment, there's not enough information about that element. And then this is moved on a bit early. This is the habitats impacts to the site. So officers have carried out an appropriate assessment and to look at the impacts, particularly on the Dorset heathlands. And this slide is comparing existing hotel in terms of occupancy and the types of development proposed, comparing with the refused scheme, previous scheme, and with the current proposal. I would say this. So what we've done is carry out quite a lot of different assessments to stress test the impacts that would arise from the overnight accommodation at the site. And this has enabled officers to rule out the impacts arriving from nutrients in Poole Harbour. However, it's not considered as simple when considering impacts on the Dorset heathlands, because the evidence base for the Dorset heathlands SPD shows that C3 dwellings are harmful within 400 metres and that they can't be mitigated. And this is applying to both residential dwellings and self-catering holiday accommodation. And there are concerns about the nature of these uses in this area, and the appropriate assessment has found there would be adverse impacts that cannot be mitigated. Firstly, there's kind of two reasons that have fed into that. One is that the effects arising from C3 dwelling houses are more harmful, and the other is that it's harder to mitigate for C3 uses because they're all individual planning units, and we've previously found that enforcement of any obligations and conditions that might be placed, it's harder to enforce them, and so they can't be relied upon. But some information has been sent in about some proposed ecological enhancements that could potentially form mitigation measures that have been proposed by the applicant. And these haven't been agreed by Natural England, but they would provide a recreational walking route within the site, around the sites, within the woodland and nearby land. They would also include some habitat restoration, particularly the area of heathland to be restored here, enhancement of the woodland, and also restoration here of a mire. A lot of this is focused on dogs. There would be, so this could be a dog walking route, and there could be an area where dogs could be let off leads. Currently, dogs are accommodated in the hotel, and so these measures could make the hotel more attractive to dog owners by promoting dog-friendly facilities. But I would say the applicant has now indicated, as I said at the beginning, as an update, that they would be willing to accept no dogs at the scheme, which then could potentially remove some of these measures. So it could change this to just being a recreational route for people without dogs and without the dog facilities being included. That hasn't been consulted on or subject to any they haven't consulted with Natural England about this and potential impacts because we've only just had that information from the applicant. And this is showing the area where the woodland management plan is proposed. And I would note part of it is outside of the boundary, which is compartment 2. That's on National Trust land. However, it's not considered that this is an issue because the National Trust are willing to, this is part of a plan which includes land within the site and outside, and that's not considered to be an issue with regards to implementation, because this would could implement parts which are in the site. However, the plan as submitted is not considered acceptable, and it's been agreed that it needs updating. Authorities have said that they need to see it as part of the current application because of the importance of the mitigation. What I would reference is that the submitted plan would remove 95% of the sweet chestnut and holm oak trees, 50% of the Scots pine trees, and this is needed for the health of the woodland, but it would have an impact on the effectiveness of this as mitigation for landscape impacts. Looking at the highways, I'd just point out, and there's a summary about highways later, there's no objection from highways to the proposal, and it wasn't a previous reason for refusal. Would use the existing access, which is considered acceptable. And in terms of existing parking on the site, this is showing that the existing parking isn't laid out with the individual spaces, but this is identifying the capacity and where spaces could go. So the blue and purple are showing parking areas previously identified on the earlier scheme. An additional 7 spaces have been identified and drawn on, as you can see, in red. So there's now a total of, it's agreed there's capacity for 86 parking spaces on the site as existing, and the proposal would have 75 parking spaces. Looking at drainage, the initial proposal that was sent, as I mentioned, was discharging surface water into Little Sea in the Pipley Swamp, that proposal was objected to by Natural England, and so have a revised proposal. And that revised proposal was to discharge into an assumed surface water sewer. I think we now have a revised proposal again, although it hasn't been subject to consultation, which would potentially discharge water into a ditch. At the moment, we don't have enough information to be confident that sustainable drainage can be achieved, and we can't be confident that, therefore, that drainage can be achieved without discharging into the Dorset Heaths, and this is forming a reason for refusal to proposal and it failing appropriate assessment. So in terms of the planning conclusions, in terms of the principle of the development, and the enhancement of the hotel and visitor facilities at Knowle House Hotel is supported in principle. However, the scale, massing, design and impact needs to be proportionate, and the proposal is contrary to policy CO due to the significant adverse impacts it would have on the environment. Economic benefits are considered significant in terms of the contribution to the local economy, jobs and tourism. And regarding the AONB and Heritage Coast, it's considered this is a major development due to its scale, massing and impact. And however, the significant economic benefits identified are not considered to outweigh the negative impacts. And the tests regarding major development in the AONB are not fully satisfied. There's also insufficient evidence to demonstrate the proposals will not harm retained trees, many of which are protected. In terms of heritage, less than substantial harm identified to the unlisted heritage asset Knowle House Hotel. However, it's considered that is outweighed by the economic benefits. In terms of habitat regulations, This is proposing C3 dwellings within 400 metres of the Dorset Heathlands, which is not acceptable. And there's a potential for surface water discharge towards the Dorset Heaths, which we can't rule out without knowing where the surface water would go. The mitigation measures which are proposed are not considered sufficient to outweigh the adverse impacts, and so the appropriate assessment could not conclude no harm to habitat sites. Regarding the access and parking, the exact access is existing and is considered acceptable. There is a reduction in parking capacity in comparison to the existing hotel, but there's been no objection from Highways. Regarding drainage, there's insufficient information to be able to ascertain the appropriateness of the surface water management of the proposal. And regarding biodiversity, at the moment, it's not accompanied by an approved biodiversity plan or adequate evidence about that. In terms of the key issues, this application, with the habitat regulations, there's an issue. This is kind of saying the things which would need to change if the proposal at this site were to be acceptable, while reminding members to bear in mind that we can only consider the scheme as it is at the moment. So the issues are the classification of development as C3. Pets on the site can't be conditioned for a C3 use. Don't have an adequate surface water drainage scheme. And the outcome of an appropriate assessment is unknown if anything was to change, but the scheme would still include self-catering accommodation. The landscape and trees, there's need to address resolution and rendering issues. They'd also need to reduce the height and impact of the main hotel and apartment building, reduce the height and diffuse the bulk of villas within the site, and more consistency in the design approach between the various elements, a reduction in the impacts of the car park and glazing, and further consideration about lots of details. And this is all comments which have been made by the A&B team during the application, which haven't been addressed. In terms of drainage, we need to demonstrate that can be satisfactorily achieved. We need a biodiversity plan. The trees need updated information, and that may result in some requirements to amend the design. So the recommendation is to refuse permission for the reasons that were set out in the report. I've got the reasons on the slide, I won't read through them all. And mainly, so there's the first being relation to impacts on the AONB and the Heritage Coast. The second being the impacts on habitat sites and protected heathlands. Thirdly, a lack of information about surface water management. Fourthly, lack of adequate details about ecology or a biodiversity plan. And lastly, insufficient evidence about the trees and how those would be protected in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very detailed presentation. I'm going to move now, excuse me, move now to the public speakers for this application. And we have two public speakers. The first one is the agent Ben Reid. You have 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
The applicant bent over backwards to try and incorporate comments made by when House was last appeared in 2022. We addressed everything raised. As a result, and following further public consultation, we have a scheme and design which local residents are very happy with. After 6 years of investment into the planning process, the applicant has had to dig deep. I'll try and make a number of points clear during the report tested based on the assessment submitted. This landscape led with smaller scale buildings and 9 scene view units, green roofs and underground construction It is much more energy efficient with solar PV, air source heat pumps, a district heating network, and clean electricity replacing oil and gas. Reducing car trips when compared to existing, improving air quality, introducing sustainable travel measures, including a staff bus, reducing capacity of people on site, but increasing quality of space to deliver a luxury facility to represent Dorset. Kingfisher are hotel and resort operators. That's what they do. And they've offered legal controls to secure this. Increased employment, careers, £65 million boost in construction, and then 8.4 million year on year supporting the local economy. Regulate a legacy drainage system which discharges surface water uncontrolled into the surrounding landscape with a controlled system which is discussed to filter and slow discharge. Astonishingly, this is the reason for refusal. Deliver a range of biodiversity enhancements set out in the biodiversity plan. 38% BNG and a package of measures to educate guests on the surroundings. Fundamentally, to protect the heathland from adverse effects required to be assessed in accordance with habitat regulations. On this issue, a note's been circulated to you, prepared by King's Council, to assist you in your determination. There are two competing conclusions before members. The first, shadow AA prepared by the applicant, a 900-page assessment. The second one prepared by officers and attached to the committee report. In short, the proposal would not give rise to recreational impacts over and above those of the existing hotel. By reducing capacity, including an allowance for staff, we saved by 59 people, officers saved by 127 people. Removing dogs from the scheme, dogs are currently a major part of the problem. Promoting a circular walk as an alternative to the heathland, which has been recommended by Natural England. The restoration of the former mire to create more wetland habitat. Robust legal controls also proposed to align accommodation to the part of the luxury boutique resort. There are many examples of this. If the members agree to this, they can conclude that the test of regulation 63 are met. Finally, having read the appropriate assessment for the first time 5 days ago, the applicant has offered a condition to restrict the whole scheme to a C1 use to address much of what officers say. If members are minded to agree to this, we would invite the deferral of this application to enable an updated appropriate assessment. This is appropriate and will be supported by the applicant.
Thank you very much. Bang on time. And our second speaker is Councillor Cherry Brooks, who is the local ward member. Welcome back to the committee, Cherry, and again, you have 3 minutes.
We considered this application in great depth last year. The applicants listened carefully to what you said, particularly Councillor Brenton, on the design and impact, and have come up with something that, in my view, and in the locals' view, is massively improved and innovative at considerable cost, I might add. It's now 6 years since the application was first submitted. That's a long time. Cost is significant, not only to the applicant, but to us in terms of resources. But we're bound by our statement to work proactively with applicants, and this has been extremely complicated. Most people would have given up by now, and the cynic in me thinks that what could be what our environmental statutory consultees have wanted all along. And please remember that's what they are, consultees, not decision makers. That's you. Maybe someone thought that if we delay long enough, the problem would go away. The reality is these environmental issues are being played out in planning applications all across the country and are severely hampering the future growth plans that councillors are committed to. And I mean all political parties on that. So why does it have to be either or? 3 of our portfolio holders, Councillors Gibson, Suttle and Bryan, along with different areas of responsibility, have stated, along with me as both ward member and lead member for adult social care, that we obviously have a responsibility to protect our natural environment and are committed to that. But we all feel that we can support the human element as well as the other species and achieve something that is in harmony, not in constant conflict. Government planning guidance asks you to find solutions where environment and growth are in conflict, and this is our opportunity. This application has been brought before you by the development manager to decide whether the benefits outweigh the harm. again, a subjective decision. The officer is recommending refusal based on the appropriate assessment, which again is subjective. You as a committee can accept the interpretation, but you are absolutely at liberty to decide for yourselves if you find it differing perspective, and you can approve this application. I'm sure you understand the consequences of not approving this application. The applicants do not have a bottomless pit. They're a business, a good business, and we, like the residents of Studland, should be welcoming the proposed improvements that they are looking to fund. The existing hotel is starting to deteriorate badly. The Christmas before last, all visitors had to be sent home at the last minute because the hot water system broke and could not be repaired over the holiday season. Can you imagine how those visitors to our county felt? Would they come back and spend their Dorset pound? I think not. Would I go back? Definitely not. Do we want a dilapidated complex of buildings as part of our offering for tourism? The first you see when you enter Dorset from Studland Ferry? I think not. Also, how much food was wasted that Christmas? How many food miles were unnecessarily used? How many local suppliers suffered hardship because of cancelled orders? On the other hand, do we want somewhere that offers local residents reduced packages for health and well-being? I think we do.
Cherry, can I ask you to sum up, please? You've had your 3 minutes.
Sorry. Okay, so the time has come for us to be accountable. If you feel you can support this application, even if conditions are necessary, please do so. But if you still have reservations, please do not refuse. It's our greatest hope that you will approve, but if not, request that you recommend deferral so that the officers and applicants can get around the table, iron out the last pieces of 6 years' work and put something before you that you feel can be more easily resolved. Clarifying, I asked for this to be heard on the 22nd of December before the notice to committee is issued. Finally, thank you for your time. This has been a torturous process, but we are a council that punches above its weight. We see it time and time again. We get award after award. I'd like us to show courage. And
I'm going to stop you there now, Cherry. Thank you. In the protocol.
So I don't worry.
Okay, I'm going to come back to officers and ask if there are any areas that they wish to clarify following the public speaking.
Yes, okay. Just to clarify regarding the shadow HRA that was submitted as part of the application, and this actually screened out any habitat issues, and in doing so it had included some mitigation, and so our advice would be that that is not a legally sound approach, and we would not recommend that you adopt that HRA. Regarding the potential for a condition to restrict to a C1 use, this is not something that can be conditioned. It is because the proposal has clearly applied for a C3 use. In order to change the use, there would need to be a new application form submitted and consulted on. There's also a lot of consultee comments been made about the C3 use, so we would need to have their inputs and their chance to be consulted in the process. The level of restriction that would be required to be placed on a C3 use, we consider would not meet the SIL tests, because it would be such that it would no longer be a C3 use.
Chairman, could I just add in relation to the suggestion around a deferral, just wanted to highlight that whilst habitats regulations clearly is one of our key and proposed reasons for refusal, it's not the only proposed reason for refusal. And officers have also, as Ursula set out in her presentation, highlighted a number of other concerns and particularly impact on the area of outstanding natural beauty as well. So just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Phil Krauser, our legal expert, would like to say a few words as well.
Thank you, Chair. So the document that you will have received in the last day or so, and which was referred to by Mr. Reid about the appropriate assessment and your ability to adopt a new appropriate assessment. So the appropriate assessment that was appended to the report is a appropriate assessment that's been undertaken by officers under delegated powers. So that is a document. It's not a recommendation to you that that's what you should accept. That's an appropriate assessment which has been carried out by the authority, and it would not be appropriate for you to reach a different decision today if you consider that there's an internal conflict in the councils in the appropriate assessment that has been undertaken. So it doesn't, you can't see how it gets from point A to point B, or you've got a cogent reason why there's an error in the conclusion, or that there's an evidential issue which would lead you to reach a different conclusion, then you would have to defer the application so that can be reconsidered by officers. And even in the event that you did have the ability to adopt a different appropriate assessment today, in theory, my advice is that you simply don't have the information before you to enable you to do that in terms of the material that you would need to take into account and balance. So on the appropriate assessment side of things, my advice is that the option open to you today is to defer, and you could only proceed today to grant permission on the habitat regulation position if you consider that there were imperative reasons of overriding public interest to grant permission. And officers' view, I think, is that in this case that there simply aren't. It's a very high bar, and that simply wouldn't apply in this case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We also have Alistair Trendall, who is our drainage expert, attending online. Given that drainage has been raised by the speakers and we did have some late updates, Alistair, I wonder if you want to reflect on anything that you've heard so far this morning.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Yeah, I did hear one comment that they were surprised that drainage is a reason for refusal. At the moment, actually on Monday afternoon, a revised strategy came in, a verbal strategy, and although it's sort of acceptable in principle and it seems like a good idea, we haven't actually been able to consult with the owners of the ditch and also with Wessex Water, because there's a rising sewer main right where they want to discharge to as well. So although the strategy that was presented to me on Monday appears like it may be okay, we haven't been able to ascertain with the relevant people that it's acceptable to them as well. That's all I really wanted to add.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll come back to you if members have questions once we start the debate. Okay. Okay, we've heard quite a lot so far. I'm now going to turn to you, members. David Took, first member to speak. Can you remind people who you are and where you're from?
I'll try. My name is David Took. I'm ward member for Cranbourne and Alderholt. I have a lot of sympathy with this application. I think my questions are regarding use class C1 to C3. If these items are C3, that's dwelling house, that's the same use classes as my house and your house. Does that, and they are, as I understand it, they're separate planning entities or units was the phrase you used? They're individual planning units. So that sort of implies that one of these C3 units could be sold off as a private dwelling. Is that correct?
So the proposal, I believe, would be to restrict those to holiday use only. So it would not be, it's my understanding, not be sold as private unit.
Well, I think there's been discussions about that. I mean, the restriction to holiday use only would not prevent them being sold as an individual unit, and the creation of C3 dwelling houses would create separate planning units. And there has been discussions around a Section 106 obligation, which could potentially prevent their sale as individual units. through a Section 106 obligation.
C3 is dwelling houses, flats, apartments, whether or not as a main residence. My understanding of what you said earlier was that you can't condition a C3 use to not be a main residence. Is that my misunderstanding, or?
You could condition it to be a holiday use, but then I think the definition of a holiday use is
Well, that's not a main residence, is it?
I don't think C3 has to be a main residence.
No, I believe you
It-
could you could
It
condition
can be, yeah, so you could condition it not to be a main residence and to be a holiday use.
I hear what you're saying. I struggle to understand how that works. In the use class C3 suggests that something can be, if it's C3, it can be a main residence. That's what C3 means. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. When you say, you can say it can't be a main residence, i.e. it's holiday use only, that means it's not C3, surely. But there's a discrepancy here, either in the legislation or my understanding, I'm not sure which, but they can't both be true, surely.
It's quite common that we limit a C3 dwelling house to a holiday use where there are appropriate planning reasons to do so. What my concern is, I think that wouldn't go far enough in this instance because that would still enable somebody to have it as a second home, for instance, for holiday use up to 130-ish days a year, and then to be let out to other people at other periods of time. And I don't consider that would be sufficient to mitigate harm to habitats. I think you'd need to go a lot further than that in terms of limiting how it was used, and in so doing you would essentially limit it so far that it would no longer be a C3 dwelling. And I think Phil could maybe
So
actually comment on that.
I'd feel an awful lot happier if this application had these as C1. I don't understand why they would be C3. But that's my main and principal objection to this.
Just very briefly, because I was looking at the definition, and Ursula may have answered questions you were going along, but C3 uses the dwelling, as you said, whether or not as a sole or main residence. So it can be a sole or main residence, or it may not be a sole or main residence. But it's used, if you take the first kind of subcategory of what it is, it's used by a single household as a dwelling house, in the sense that you and I would recognise a single dwelling house to be, but that includes second homes used by, and it also used, your in inverted commas normal holiday cottage, where it's let out to single family groups. That would still be a C3 use. Any of those uses would be acceptable under C3 without condition, but it is acceptable to condition those down, to narrow those uses. So it's perfectly legitimate for it to be a C3 use and have a holiday condition, as Ursula said, which we often do. What it's not acceptable to do is impose a condition effectively changing that use from C1 to C3, because that's a fundamental change to the application, and that would be an unreasonable and therefore an unlawful condition. And my advice is that for the same reason, that can't be achieved through a planning obligation, because you're effectively, I don't think it would meet the test for a planning obligation, because you're changing the nature of the development by imposing that condition. So if your view is that C3 dwellings in this location aren't, so if, and I emphasise that, if your collective view is that C3 dwellings are not acceptable, then that should take you to a refusal, because you can't condition it to make it acceptable in the way that you would want to see it.
It's so true that if it's a C3 use, it can be converted to C4 without any further application. I know that there's sort of 3 bedrooms, but you can get sort of 2 or 3 students, perhaps. House of multiple occupation, stopping in the forest. So C3 to C floor doesn't require any further planning application. Is that right? I suppose I don't.
Thank you, Chair. In order to answer the direct question, I'd need some time to check. It's not an answer that I've got in my head because it would be under the permitted development order, and I would need to look that up. But I think that is something that you could condition. You could restrict through condition. You could prohibit that change of use through condition. So that's a slightly different answer to the question, but I think that would possibly address your concern. I can look up can try and find the answer to your primary question.
Concern is this C3 use. I think is prone to abuse, perhaps. Thank you.
The next speaker is Alex Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. Alex Brenton, ward member for Litchfield and Upton, so possibly the only member from Purbeck on this committee at the moment. This is an area that I think most people know this area well and drive past, and we are, I think, are all in agreement that something needs to be done to Knoll House Hotel. I've got 2 or 3 questions, which I'll go into, and a couple of observations. So one of them was, I see that on the roof line of the ones at the back, whatever we're calling them, the properties at the back, there is a slight overhang. My issue is, in a time of climate change with increasingly hot summers, it's all very well attracting light in and having lots of glazing, and that's all terribly lovely. And a lot of solar gain, yes, and you've got solar panels. How are we going to cool these buildings? Because the plans include an awful lot of air conditioning. That's actually a higher carbon footprint than having natural shading. They don't appear to have any shutters on them. There's an awful lot of light and an awful lot of sun. The glare issue from the back of the building, if you know what I mean, coming down along the Purbeck Ridge, the glare isn't so much, I don't think, is as much of a problem. I'm thinking in terms of living conditions of these buildings themselves. They may have balconies, but you need to actually have a covered balcony in the weather we've had in the last few summers, and allegedly we're going to keep having. This is a very hot part of the world anyway. It is prone, I mean, because it's heath. We have had heath fires down there quite often. You know, this is an area that can burn. So I was also wondering about water supply, fire breaks, and such like, and there doesn't seem to be any mention of that anywhere. So again on that one, in the there was one page, I think it's 52. When we get to the photo montages or the sort of illustrative drawings, have the heights of the trees at the beginning, at the front of the building, should we say, very roadside, actually being measured, because they appear to be taller than the buildings. I have a slight query about that, particularly if the ground floor levels are going to be changed. You know, in the indicative drawings, the trees are always taller than the buildings, and I'm going, okay. I just wondered if the height of the trees have been measured. But I think the big crunch on this, like my colleague, is the use of the buildings. Would we allow 30 new dwellings in this area that were privately owned? That's a question. I don't think we probably would. So I would like it to be, you know, if it's controlled by a hotel, you tend to assume it will be serviced in some way, and I would want that sort of C1 protection that it was a serviced hotel apartment rather than an individual private home. That's 2 or 3 things through.
I don't have an answer to the question about cooling, other than to say that it would need to be constructed in line with building regulations, which I appreciate may not be the answer.
Can I just add to say building regulations were updated with the part O, I believe it is, that specifically addresses overheating. So yes, that would be our response. That would be covered by building regulations.
And similarly with the fire and water supply issues, those are covered by building regulations as well. Garden height of the trees, do you?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, there is an arboricultural impact assessment which would have given an indication of the height of the trees. I'm not quite sure what your specific question was in relation to that height and how it's depicted.
I mean, sorry, Chair, can I? Those trees now are quite clearly taller than the building. But when you get to, I can't remember what it is, there's some indicative, profiles of the new building. And the trees still seem to be taller, even though we're going to be digging up the soil and moving, doing ground movement. And I just wondered if they had been measured so that therefore it was a true accuracy in the photograph.
That's something that I think we need to actually go away and undertake those measurements to finalise whether it is an accurate representation. I personally have no reason to dispute how that has been depicted in the visualisations.
As well, there are not earthworks proposed under these trees, so the trees would remain as is in terms of the levels in that area. But there are obviously earthworks in other parts of the site.
Okay, does that answer all your questions?
I'm just still
Time being.
keeping them there.
Okay. Philip has an answer on the change of use class.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor, yes, you were right. There is a permitted development right to change from a C3 dwelling to a small house in multiple occupation, so up to 6 residents. But as I said, if you thought that the application as before you was acceptable and your concern was about change to HMO, you could impose a condition to prevent that. Thank you.
Would we reject it on the grounds they're proposing C3 use, whereas we think C1 is more appropriate? Would we do something to change that at this session, or would we have to make another application with C1 rather than C3?
I think the advice that's already been given is that if you find that the C3 use is not acceptable, then it will need to be a refusal with a new application. It's not something that can be altered through a deferral because it's such a major change. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my next speaker, and that's Mike Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman. Mike Dyer, West Mawson, Three-Legged Cross. Following on from the discussion we've just had, as I understand it, Natural England say that the effect on habitats of C3 dwellings can't be mitigated. And when the applicant's agent spoke, he said that the applicant was willing to change that to C1. Is it? I think that's what I heard. So you just said that deferral isn't an option and gave the reasons. So I would like to propose that it's refused for that reason, and then the applicant can come back and change the C3 use if he wishes to C1, and we can look at the application in a fresh light.
Okay. Do you have any other reasons for refusal? Because there are a lot of reasons in the report with the officer recommendation, if you only progress on the C3 issue, then that means you would accept all of the other environmental issues that have been raised by officers. So I need to be very clear whether or not you wish to include any of those in your reason for refusal.
I think I would, but I don't understand that as well as some of the other members obviously do. So could we park that and open it up for discussion about the other reasons for refusal that could be had?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, of course, you've had the officer's report before you, and if you agreed with the conclusions of the report and therefore with the recommended reasons for refusal, it is of course open for you to refuse the application on the basis of all of those reasons if you agree with them. So you could make that proposal if you wished, but we just need to be clear as you've made a proposal on your reasons or reasons for that proposal before it's seconded.
I think in that situation, then I'll withdraw it and let the debate continue.
Jane,
Thank you. It's a long.
can you?
Sorry. Councillor Shane Bartlett, Ward Member for Wimbledon. It's a long, similar to Councillor Dyer, but from a different direction. I just need some clarity and some advice. Both legally and planning. I've got a number of questions that I was going to ask, but sort of a hand grenade was thrown into the room as far as I was concerned by the applicant, saying they were, if I understood correctly, he was asking for a deferment. So where my concerns lie are that if we ignore that request from the applicant and we progress with determining in this application, and we were to find in favour with the officer recommendation with the application, and if the applicant then went to appeal, what risk would this authority be at? Because we've ignored the request from the applicant to defer the item. Because I'm.
It's above my pay grade.
Yeah.
I think, as the local planning authority, we always need to behave reasonably in terms of assessing planning applications. But my understanding of national policy and national guidance and position is that the onus is on the applicant to submit an application they wish to see assessed. In this case, we have assessed the application, and officers did accept one round of amended plans as well during the course of the application. Officers also raised, I believe, the concerns in regard to C1 use some time in advance of this meeting, and it's only 2 days before that there was a suggestion that may now be acceptable to the applicant. And also I would come back to the point I made earlier that the habitats regulations is not the only reason for refusal on this scheme. There are a number of other outstanding matters. So overall, taking all of that into account, my personal view is that it would be reasonable to proceed to assess what is before the committee and reach a decision on that basis, and that we have already allowed for negotiation during the course of that application.
Happy with that. I mean, I think I just supplement it by saying in the direct answer, I don't think there would be a risk to the authority on that basis.
Obviously, hugely frustrated because it does appear to be a bit of a huge opportunity that's being missed because officers and the applicant haven't assessed and come to an agreement on a lot of the issues surrounding the application that is leaning towards the officer recommendation. But can I move to my question, please? So some of them have really already been answered, so it's probably going to be a yes or no answer. And the question was around it. That it's still the case that the applicant hasn't completed the biodiversity of racial protocol. That's still a no, is it?
As at 10 this morning, that was a no. But I am aware the applicant has been working with the Net team on that.
I'm asking the question because there's so much coming in at the 11th hour, and it's really frustrating. So that would obviously bring into question the applicant's approach to mitigating the harm to the surrounding local environment then, in your view.
Yes, without that having been agreed and submitted, I don't think we can place any weight on discussions that have been had outside of the formal planning process.
Yeah, it's a guidance, isn't it? It's not.
They don't have to go through the biodiversity protocol. However, there is a requirement to submit sufficient details, and we looked at the details and they weren't sufficient.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So in the report, page 57, it's made reference to the surface water discharge from the site. And we've had a lot of discussion around that. It's been at the Liver Tower, another proposal coming as to how that could be addressed. But that's in the report. I didn't see anything about foul water being addressed.
Foul water, there's no objection from Wessex Water to use of the sewers for foul water.
I saw there was no objection. That covers that then, does it? That was.
There's not an increase in the number of people staying overnight, so we're not concerned about the impacts of foul sewage.
And it's in your view that in terms of the villa block, would it be fair to regard the size, the bulk and the height of the structure as excessive and does not take into account the landscape setting and is sympathetic to the environment that would dominate? Now, obviously asking the question to get it out into the public domain, I think we all have a view on that answer within the room, but that just to ascertain that is a significant reasoning that is presenting a problem with passing this application. One of the problems, yeah.
It is, yes. The AONB team have been asked to comment on the application and the changes that have been made to it. And they do not consider that the changes that have been made to the scheme are actually enough to overcome their objection in terms of the scale and massing. And in terms of internally, the landscape officers, we actually support the findings of the AONB team as well.
For clarification on page 24, comment from the landscape strategy. I was a bit confused by a comment. It says it shows green roofs in areas where the roof plan suggests a green roof will not be used. I didn't quite understand that comment.
That's the comments from the AONB team.
I think there is some confusion over whether the landscape strategy does actually work with the roof plans that we've actually had as part of the application. So there's just some concern that green roofs are shown on the landscape strategy where there may not be in reality.
Okay. So the next question, Madam Chairman, was there's discussion within the report and obviously on the plans and the drawings about the topography and about re-establishing the landscape on the site, with particular regard to the bund that's going to be created to help offset the impact, the visual impact of the structure that's going to be built. Is that going to be done through the earth that's already on site, or is there a plan to lorry earth in? It doesn't say in the report. I'm just wondering whether that topography change is going to be all done actually on site, or whether they're going to be lorrying other material in to accomplish that. We know.
I'll find out the answer to that and see.
Okay. That's my questions for now. I've got a comment I'll come back to later.
Okay, I'll give Ursula some time to get you the answer to that question, and I'll move on to my next speaker, and then I'll come back to you. Robin Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Robin Cook staring out of the hall. I think the room is we want this. Not in the format that's presented here. When we look at reasons for refusal, I would say that most of those can be overcome. question of the heathland and the C3, well, that's obvious. I mean, you can't get away from that. If we were to get another application, say for C1, I think my view would be that's more controllable in terms of the effect on the heathland particularly. Anyway, other questions of more basic variety, really, which I don't think were covered in this, and it's if this were to proceed, the things like the staff. Now, on the original plan, the staff are going to be accommodated on site. That's not now going to happen. It's going to be 100, is it 150? I've lost the slide here. About 150 staff working, commuting basically. I read somewhere that it's going to be a shuttle bus from Poole. Is that right? Am I right on that? Somebody correct me. Shuttle bus from Poole. So correct. Correct. So if I work there and live in Swanage, what happens? Oh, they are.
The applicant suggested, sorry, Chair, through you, the applicant suggested that the route for the shuttle bus is expected to start at excuse me, and end at Mill House, passing through Wareham, Castle and Swanage once an hour. But it's subject to the framework travel plan, so obviously the details can be finalised. But that is their suggestion, and the shuttle bus will be available for staff and for residents if necessary. They also mentioned the framework travel plan and the possibility of collecting residents or hotel residents from Bournemouth Airport, for example. So I think it's an indication they provide the service. Details to be agreed.
Those details will obviously be reflected on demand.
Well, yes, but I mean, the parking around there, is, well, we all know what the parking is like around there anyway. There's yellow lines. It's not anybody takes any notice of that in the summertime anyway. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Can we have a little bit more? Well, I got a bit confused somewhere. Maybe it's me, but I got a bit confused somewhere about the dog walking. We're not having that now, are we? Because we're not having that because dogs will not be, if this went ahead, dogs will not be permitted.
Up until 2 days ago, the applicant was very clear they wished to retain dogs on the site, but now they have said they would be willing to accept remove no dogs on the site. So yes, that element could be removed, but it hasn't been. The documents haven't been updated to remove it, but we have had an email to say they would accept removal.
All right. And this footpath, no, not footpath, this woodland walk, or whatever you want to call it, nature walk, designed to encourage people not to stray onto the heathland in general. Is the sort of control? Because it's open access land, I believe. So, for you, Chairman. Sorry.
Legal point.
No, it's all right. No. I was asking about the footpath, the suggested footpath of woodland walk. Because it's open access land, there's nothing to prevent people straying onto the heathland anyway. But on balance, I think it's something like, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 million odd people go to Studland during the course of the season, could be 1 million or more.
Yeah.
What sort of control for them going on the heathland is there? And none at all, right? So we've got a project here, which I think is on the face of it evidently suitable, that the economic benefits are there for us to see. But there'll be more control on people that are using that facility than there are on the 1 million plus people that are already going to Studland. And the matter of how many people are going to be staying here is not going to make a great deal of difference. Anyway, said that, to come back to the reasons for refusal that Councillor Dyer proposed, and that proposal is not on the table now, is it? No. I think, Chairman, you asked him, or he was asked to strengthen that reason for refusal.
I didn't ask him to strengthen it. I asked him if he wanted to consider the reasons for refusal put forward by officers so that we are sure on what we are voting on.
Well, I've looked at those reasons for refusal again, and there's 5 of them basically. There's 5 compartments. I mean, we can do all of that. I mean, because the only thing that has been addressed, and we're still waiting for further information, is a bit about the drainage. But nevertheless, I think all of that if we refuse it based on that, the applicant can deal with most of that and come back if they want to come back with a revised application, because a lot of the stuff in there can be addressed. You'll never, until the regulations change, you never change the habitat regulations, but that will always be there. But in terms of the other things there, the applicant can address those if they're so minded. So I'm proposing, having a long preamble, proposing that we do refuse on the basis of the 5 reasons as set out by the officers. Thank you.
John, you're my next speaker. Do you wish to second the proposal?
Yes, I do. I'd like to address the committee on this. Gilbert Trickleboard. Quite conflicted on this, because of the things that are coming at the 11th hour and sort of verbal things that have been said that the applicant said they could do. But I think we need to formalise all of those bits and pieces that have come in at the last minute. You know, and there's still questions about the drainage that hasn't been answered. So I'm happy to second this proposal for refusal, because I believe that the reasons for refusal are not insurmountable. And I think if the applicant comes back with a fresh application, C3 is removed and it's C1, so there's more control, I think that will help with some of the habitat issues. So I'm quite happy to second this refusal.
Thank you. Mike Dyer, you asked to come back.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I said earlier that there's huge frustration I felt. I don't think I'm the only one in the room who feels this frustration about this application that's in front of us and what's been done at the 11th hour, and the fact that you do feel that actually some of these reasons to refuse it could have been overcome with the officer and the applicants, and it's hugely frustrating. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that I think there's 2 figures actually in the report that have been quoted over construction costs, which is, I think one's 40 million. It's in the report on page 55. And I think there's 60 or 62 million that's been quoted elsewhere, I think. You're looking at a 5 million wage economy during construction, 152 jobs. Previously, it was just over 60 jobs. 2.7 million in wages, 3.3 million supplier spend forecasting, 500,000 in wages and that forecasting. The locality would benefit from 2.5 million visitor generated spend supporting 60 jobs. That's where the frustration lies. This would have been an ideal opportunity to have developed this site for the economy of Dorset, for the tourism in Dorset. And it's a bit of a dog's breakfast in truth with what we've got in front of us now. And that's the frustration. And this should have been sorted. And I'm not blaming the officers. The applicants need to wake up. They know what the policies are. They know what's in place. The C3 policy with mitigating against heathland is a policy that's long established. So I am going to go with the officer recommendation for the report and support the proposal that's on the table. But I am deeply disappointed that we didn't get it resolved because of the benefit it could have brought to us.
Maybe you wish to come back.
Yeah, just to say that if, as I understand it from the officers, a deferment would not allow enough changes. Let me start again. There have been changes to this application up to the 11th hour already. And we're sat here today discussing a proposal that's effectively less than 24 hours old in its entirety. Is that right? Or 48 hours, certainly.
Yeah.
If there was a deferment, further discussions between the applicant and officers that actually addressed these issues, we could come back as a committee with some more certainty as to what we've got now, because we things that haven't been explored properly. If during that deferment things could be addressed fully and it can come back, I would opt for that route rather than outright refusal now. If that's not possible, then I would suggest we should refer it, and it's up to the applicants to fix what is nearly a very good proposal. Because the development of this facility within the area is badly needed. this hotel badly needs refreshing, changing, becoming an attractive proposition. And it doesn't quite do that. And I don't think it does it well enough at the moment. If we can get it deferred and then a better proposal come out of that, as negotiations have been going on until at least yesterday, then why can't we do that? If we can't do that, then let's reject it.
I need to remind you that we do have a proposal on the table that's been proposed and seconded, and we need to deal with that first. Also, the way the constitution is written at the moment, if there is any request for deferral, that has to be a member decision. So we need to go through the vote on the proposal in front of us. If that then falls, we can then look at the deferral option.
That's a sad reflection on the sequence that events are happening in. The logical solution was to say, could it be done as a deferral? If so, perhaps we can vote on that. If not, then.
Can I remind you that part of the earlier discussion was on the change of class from C3 to C1? That is not something that can be achieved through deferral. It has to be a new application.
I'm sorry, Chair, my understanding.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, of course, in principle, deferral is an option which is available to you on the basis of the proposal that's before you at the moment. In effect, that all of the recommended reasons for refusal are sound. Whether those could all be achieved by amending the current application or remedied by amending the current application, I think would take us as officers a longer time than we've got to conclude one way or the other. But that would point me towards addressing all of those concerns through deferral would be such a fundamental change to the application that it would not be possible to defer, amend the application and come back. It would require a new application on the basis of all the issues that have been identified. So then you would be looking at deferral couldn't achieve the result that you would be asking it to. Yeah, I think I'll leave that there.
I've seen a flurry of hands. I'm reluctant to let people come back for third and fourth bites of the cherry. However, can you please keep it very short and very to the point? And I'm going to do it in this order: Mike Dyer, Shane Bartlett, John Worth, and then I will bring the debate to a close.
I'm sure the applicant will have taken on board what members' feelings are during the course of the debate. And I think refusing it is probably the cleanest option because, as I say, the agent will no doubt tell the applicant what the sentiment is in the room. And I think that would encourage him to put forward another application that we could possibly support.
I'm Chairman. Yeah, I concur with Councillor Dyer. I did ask the question earlier in the debate around deferral as to whether that would be the route to go, and I take on board what the legal officer has said. And reluctantly, I will go with the officer recommendation of proposals on the table. And I agree with Councillor Dyer that I'm sure the applicant in the room, I think there's a desire in the room to see the potential of this site has for the future economy of Dorset and tourism.
John.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor John Worth, Chickle. I seconded the proposal to refuse based on the principle that I didn't think deferral was an option. If deferral had been an option that could have addressed all the issues that are there, then I would have supported that. But it isn't an option. We've heard, that it's far too complex to do within referral, so deferral. So that's why I seconded the option to refuse, based on the officer's recommendations.
Thank you. Okay, I think it's very clear that everybody supports the principle, and that to have the redevelopment of the Knowle House Hotel is an absolute boon for Dorset and something we all want to see, but it's got to be the right application. It's nearly there, but not quite. Very, very close, but it does need that extra work doing. So I'm now going to move to the vote. It's been proposed and seconded. Mike Barron, you arrived in the meeting late. Are you happy that you have heard enough of the presentation to be able to form an opinion?
Absolutely, absolutely, Chair. Sorry, a bit of internal bleeding there. We won't go into it. It's about time that we did have a vote on this. I think we've all made our minds up.
Okay, but because you were late, I had to ask
Absolutely.
that to make sure that we had a sound vote.
You're fine.
Okay, so those in favour of refusal as per the officer's recommendation, as has been duly proposed and seconded. Those in favour of refusal, please. Yeah, I'll make that 7. Those against? And abstentions? 2. Therefore, the application is refused. Thank you. Just have a 2-minute break. Okay. Right. Welcome back, members. We should now move on to the remaining items on our agenda, which is agenda items 7, 8 and 9. They're all for Smugglers Hide, 47 Brook Lane, Corfmullen. I'm not going to read them all out this time, but you can see on the screen, you've got the details of the 3 applications. And we have James Brightman and Liz Adams to take us through it.
Good afternoon, members. This site is in Corfmullen. It is at 47 Brook Lane, which is the site's known as Smugglers Hide. It's a detached dwelling that's been burnt down many years ago. The proposal is to divide the site into 2 plots, and all the land is in the same ownership. There's been just a brief update to the officer report since it was first published. In terms of housing supply, the eastern area of Dorset Council has a 4.15-year supply of housing, as you probably know. But recently, the housing supply only needs to be 4 years now. It used to be 5. So the council only needs to demonstrate 4 years. So that means the so-called tilted balance in the National Planning Policy Framework is not engaged for these applications, because our policy HE4 for housing is not out of date. Just to mention that first. Here's the site context in the district. Corfmullen, sorry, go back. We go, and the green belt is to the east, the west, and this site is in the settlement boundary, completely within the urban area. There's a partly demolished 2-storey dwelling on the site following a fire in 2007. Residential properties lie immediately to the south, east and north. The applicant controls all the land shown indicatively outlined in red on this aerial photograph. One application relates to the northern plot, which is plot B, and 2 to the southern plot, plot A. The 2 on the southern plot are replacement dwellings. The 1 on the northern plot is a new dwelling. The principle of development is acceptable because the site is in the urban area. This is showing the site context. Photographs number 1, looking from in front of Smugglers Hide, Kestor and Kimberley, the 2 dwellings to the west. Looking up the lane, trying to get my pointer to work. That one. And number 2 is a similar photograph from the front of, sorry, it's just this mouse is very sensitive. Let's go back. Number 2 is from the front of Kestrel itself, so the area of paving there is the driveway. And you can just see on the right, a little chimney with a bit of roof. That's the remains of the dwelling at Smuggler's Hide. And photograph number 4 is looking into the site from the access to the southern plot, looking down the boundary, and on the right, the boundary with Kester. Sorry about this. Eased up now. Right, next one, more photographs. Number 1 is looking from the north, approaching the site. On the left of the photo, you can see a close bordered fence. That's 157 Hillside Road's boundary. And number 2 is looking into the site from the northern access. You can see the remains of the dwelling, the 2-story part in the distance and a single-story part closer. And number 3 is looking down the boundary with 157 within the plot, 157 Hillside Road within the plot. The planning, it's important to set out the planning history, and the officer report sets that out in detail. But the main things to note in terms of the extent of planning permissions, i.e. planning permissions that are capable of being implemented. We have one for a single 2-story dwelling on the northern plot, which is plot B. That was recently granted last year. And an illustrative street scene was provided to try and demonstrate the relationship with the existing built form in the immediate area. And you can see that on the bottom of the slide. So that's the planning permission that we've granted under delegated powers. And so on the right is the property called Kester, the bottom right of that street scene. These are the elevations of the approved dwelling. It's 6.4 metres high approximately. The south elevation would face plot B, and the north elevation faces 157 Hillside Road. And the east is effectively the rear, with the west facing the lane. The other extant permission goes back a few more years to 2015 for a much larger dwelling across the whole of the 2 plots. And this is capable of being implemented due to some demolition starting many years ago. Officers have accepted this is one of the extant permissions. These are the elevations of the larger extant house. The first application on agenda item number 7 of the 3, which is for a new dwelling on the northern side of the site, which is plot B. You can see here that the site is divided into 2. The applicant owns all the site, all the land, it's divided in half roughly. You can see the context there, the dwellings to the south, north, and east. This is a proposed block plan, similar position siting to the extant planning permission. And here we have the elevations. Single-story dwelling with a small basement area. This is the street scene from Brook Lane. And you can see it sits very low in the street scene compared to the other dwellings, which are 2-story properties. This is a cross section to the south. This is the view you'd see from the southern plot. And you can just see the dwelling above the proposed fence and retaining wall. So down the centre of the plot is a fence and retaining wall to prevent any overlooking from this new single-story dwelling. What you see as plot 1 house is a dwelling that was refused a few years ago, only because it didn't have a legal agreement to prevent another application being built out, because the 2 of them would have overlapped almost. So that has been refused. There's not a material consideration, but it's just been shown on this plan. The proposed dwelling is quite deep, but would be similar to the extant permission, not excessive. These are sections through the proposed dwelling. You can see the basement area here. The ground floor plan shows a 2-bedroom dwelling here. And there is a limited outlook for the bedroom in the north elevation on the top of the slide because it faces the northern boundary. But officers do not consider this reason enough to refuse permission. The basement will have a home gym with an ensuite bathroom, a media room and a utility room. Would have limited outlook, which has previously been problematic at appeal because then bedrooms were proposed in the basement. But a bedroom is a principal room and can be expected to have a good level of outlook. But a gym or a media room, you don't expect such a good outlook and you can accept a lower level of amenity and light. And officers consider this overcomes the concern with the previous appeals and reason for refusal and consider it to be acceptable. In terms of the impact on the character of the area, the dwelling is a low-level property, sits comfortably on the plot and in relation to adjacent properties with no adverse impacts. There's also could be noted that in a previous appeal for a similar scale of dwelling, the planning inspector considered the impact on the character to be acceptable, but dismissed the appeal on the impact on the outlook from the basement rooms, which were then bedrooms, just to give you some context. In terms of the impact on neighbouring amenities, officers consider no harmful impact from the massing and height because they're not excessive and there's acceptable separation between the dwelling and adjacent buildings. The retaining wall and fence on the south side boundary would prevent harmful overlooking of the plot to the south. There are no upper floor or no first floor windows. The proposal would not result in harm to the amenity of the occupants of any of the adjacent dwellings and is compliant with Core Strategy Policy HE2. Impact on road safety. Dorset Council Highways raised no objection to the proposal. It's for a single dwelling, low traffic movements and no significant impact on the adjacent lane. The adjacent lane is a bridle way. It is not surfaced. It's very rough surface. You wouldn't drive down there particularly quickly, and there's not a lot of traffic on it. And officers agree there's space to turn, park on site, and turn vehicles in any case. And the proposal complies with the Core Strategy Policies KS 11 and 12, which relate to parking and highway safety. To conclude, the site is in the settlement boundary where the principle of a new dwelling is acceptable. There'll be no harm to the character and appearance of the area, no harmful impact on the occupants of adjacent dwellings. The amenity for future occupants of the proposed dwelling would be acceptable. There's no adverse impact on road safety, and the benefits of the proposal outweigh the impacts. And subject to the conditions set out on pages 92 to 94 of the agenda, approval is recommended. Chair, just to ask you, we've got 3 applications here. Shall I poll all of them and then we vote? Sorry, you vote at the end.
I think it might be not, because you did the overview for all 3, and then we're going into the detail. I think it'd probably be better to deal with each of them as they come forward.
Okay.
Okay, so we don't have any members of the public wishing to speak on any of the applications. So on the conclusion of the officer presentation, we can go straight to the debate. So are members in agreement that we carry on and determine this first application?
Yeah.
Should we not deal with them all in the round? Because if one falls, they all fall. If one passes, should I not?
No, they're all independent. They're not interlinked, and none of them are reliant on the others for acceptability.
So, excuse me, Chair, I would say in terms of Councillor's comment that there are 2 alternatives on these next 2 I'm going to present. So there may be some benefit, I suppose, in hearing the lot, because they can't have all 3. They can have 3. They can have 3 permissions, but they can't build all 3. We're not going to go there.
This this is the applicant's choice, is to submit multiple applications. So we determine each one on their merits, and the applicant then will choose on, depends on the outcome, how they wish to move forward. So do you still want to hear all three?
I think it would be sensible. I mean, I know it's a bit confusing, but to hear all three, and then you can sort of get a pattern of the thing.
All right.
It's not.
Happy
We'll move on to the next one then, please.
Second one, I'm starting on page 99 of your agenda. This is for plot A, which is the southern plot. The previous one was plot B. Here you can see it's a 2-storey house, 4-bedroom dwelling, with detached double garage and cycle store at the front of the plot. The red line, you'll note, the application red line doesn't extend to the very bottom of the plot on the right of the slide, but still provides a 12-metre deep rear garden for future occupiers. Proposed elevations, traditional design house with brick walls, composite slate roof and new PVC windows, flat roof garage and cycle store. 3 floors of accommodation to provide a basement also with a media room and gym, 1 bedroom on the ground floor. Again, as the previous application, the basement rooms would have a limited outlook, but are not principal rooms and do not require the same levels of outlook as principals. 3 bedrooms and a study are proposed on the first floor. The ground levels to be lowered to sink the dwelling into the site, and terracing and retaining walls used to provide some outlook and light to the basement room windows. The extant 2-storey dwelling on the plot B is shown by the dashed blue line on the lower street scene. See the relationship between this proposal and the extant dwelling and the separation involved. The laurel hedge on the front boundary of the site is to be largely retained, except for where the new access is proposed. And the existing access, which is on the southern side of the site next to Kestel, will be blocked off with a new hedge planted. You can see the height of the proposed dwelling is lower than Kester and lower than the adjacent dwellings in Hillside Road. In terms of the character of the area, the proposed dwelling is set an acceptable distance from adjacent dwellings, buildings, and it's set back from the road, the Brook Lane Road, and back a good distance from the boundary with Kester. The scale and design of the proposed dwelling is considered acceptable, and no adverse impact would result for the character of the area, and the proposal accords with core strategy policy HE2, as it will be compatible with its surroundings. In terms of the impact on the amenity of the adjacent dwellings, which are immediately Kester and 153 Hillside Road. Kester, there'll be no harmful impact on, given the relationship with the property. The dwelling proposed is set back from the front of Kester, and the south elevation would face its side boundary. There are openings, sorry, on the south elevation which faces Kester, but officers are suggesting conditions to require the upper windows in the first floor of the south elevation to be high level and with high 1.7 metre high sills, and the ground floor window to have a obscure glazing up to a height of 1.7 metres to avoid people looking back into the garden and dwelling at Kester, but giving light to the people using the room in the proposed dwelling. And officers don't consider that to be a harmful overlooking with that condition in place. In terms of the impact on the property at the rear, which is 153 Hillside Road, there's a good distance between the proposed dwelling and number 153, which is 34 metres. little rectangle square block you see on that slide, just above the words 153 Hillside Road, is actually a garage. So the dwelling is further to the right of 153. We've got to consider the impact on the amenity of the occupants of the extant dwelling at plot B, which is to the north, and the proposed single-storey dwelling you are now considering today, just in case they're both approved. So with the extant dwelling, the one we've already granted, there would be some loss of sunlight to the south-facing window, but the rooms served by these windows also have windows in the rear, and this impact is not considered harmful enough to justify refusing on that basis. In terms of the proposed single-storey dwelling for consideration today at plot B, there would be some loss of sunlight to the south-facing window in this dwelling. But again, the room served by this south-facing window has a window on the rear elevation, so officers don't consider this to be harmful to warrant refusal in its own right. Impact on road safety, similar to the last, sorry about this. Very small level of traffic generated by the proposal, as with the last scheme, would not adversely affect road safety. There's adequate space to park vehicles and turn vehicles on the site. Of course, the council have raised no objection. To conclude, the site is in the settlement boundary, so the principle is acceptable. There will be no harm to the character of the area, no harmful impact on occupants of the adjacent dwellings. The amenity for future occupants of the dwelling would be acceptable. No adverse impact on road safety, and the benefits of the proposal outweigh the impact. And subject to the conditions set out on pages 123, 125, approval is recommended. The third and final one is on page 131. This is an application for plot B. Plot A, which is the one we just heard about, the same plot, an alternative design to the one you just heard. As you can see, it's a very similar scheme, but the dwelling is less bulky than the previous dwelling. A similar position on the plot with the same garage and cycle store at the front of the parking area. Dwelling would be set back from Brook Lane, and a similar distance between it and Kestel as the previous application, with a greater distance between it and 153 Hillside Road at the rear of the plot, between the two-storey sections of those opposing buildings. Those elevations, we see a two-storey house, and the thing to note is on the south elevation, top right slide, is a much narrower gable presented to the boundary of Kestel. There are two windows in that elevation, one at first floor, one at ground floor, and both of those would have a condition to requirement to be obscure, high level, to prevent any overlooking to the south. The materials will be rendered walls with a brick plinth with a concrete tile roof and new PVC windows. These are the garage and cycle stores, again flat roofed. This proposal also has a basement with 3 floors of accommodation. The basement has the media room and the gym, much like the other two, and with light wells into the retaining walls or terracing to provide some level of outlook and light to the basement. There's a study but no bedroom at the ground floor level. Two bedrooms on the first floor. The bedroom nearest the boundary with Kestel, which has a high level window, also has a standard window at the rear. So in terms of the window, the outlook from that particular bedroom, there's no harm to the outlook from having a high level window on the south elevation, because it's only a secondary window. In terms of impact on street scene and the general character of the area, the ridge level, as can be seen on that upper street scene, lower than Kestel the adjacent dwelling at Kestel. And on the lower slide, we can see the cross section across the plot. If you're looking from the garden of Kestel effectively on that lower cross section, so you can see the two windows facing the street. The lowest cross section shows a bit of planting or hedging on that boundary. It's vegetation really. Officers still consider the condition is necessary to require that window to be obscure glaze on the lower level, because that boundary vegetation can't be guaranteed to remain in place forever. And also we're not sure whether it's in the control of the applicant. In terms of the overall impact on the character of the area, the photo on the top right is looking up from the front boundary of Kestel for the plot. And as the previous application, you can see the remains of the dwelling at Smuggler's Hide, top right. The general pattern of development in the area would suit this scheme, and it would not be out of keeping accordingly. Sorry about this. Right, the impact on Kestel. I mentioned previously about the obscure glazed window and the impact from the southern facing window. In terms of the impact from massing and scale for Kestel as the nearest property, Kestel will have some impact from this, but this, given the relationship between this particular dwelling and Kestel and the separation, officers don't think it's harmful enough. It's harmful to warrant refusal on the basis of impact from the scale of that gable facing their property. In terms of the extent, as the previous scheme really, the extent dwelling on plot B, which is the northern plot, there'll be some loss of light to the south facing window again in the extent dwelling, but the room in the extent dwelling also has a window at the rear, so the same scenario arises. This may have less of an impact because it's got a narrower gable facing north than the previous scheme, but there's not enough harm to warrant refusal in officers' opinion. In terms of the proposed single-storey dwelling on plot B, again, some loss of sunlight to the south-facing window, but the room served by this south-facing window also has a window at the rear, so no significant adverse impact and not harmful enough. To conclude, as with the previous two applications, the principle of development is acceptable. No harm to the character of the area from this one or occupants of adjacent dwellings. The amenity for future occupants would be acceptable. No adverse impact on road safety, and the benefits of the proposal outweigh the impact. Approval is recommended subject to the conditions set out on pages 156 to 158 of the agenda. This might help. This is a comparison of all three you've just had presented. Officers' view is that all three are acceptable and are recommended for approval, but members will be able to see the differences between the three proposals, hopefully at a glance here. Just to sum up, this is just to show you the conditions, to summarise the conditions for all three. Right, I think that's it. So I'll leave it on the summary one with maybe that one, yeah, to show you. Maybe that's a good point to stop. Thank you.
Okay.
Jem.
Thank you. Okay, so we have no public speakers. The first speaker is Mike Barron.
Mike Barron, ward member for Corfmullen. No one's been in touch with me about this whatsoever. Neither to approve or disapprove, but you can say that I'm in favour of it as well, because what's there at the moment isn't particularly nice to look at. Yeah.
Are you going to move?
Move.
Yeah, it will be three individual recommendations. So if we deal with plot B first, so that's the single story on the north side, 04037. So you're proposing grant as per the officer recommendation.
Grant, yes.
Do you want a second? Anyone else wish to speak to this application?
My only observation would be that because there's basically been a derelict building there and it's been neglected for some time, there would be a loss of biodiversity. But it is better to do something than nothing. So I support.
I could comment on that just briefly. That there is biodiversity enhancement proposed in one of the conditions. So we will get some biodiversity enhancement within the new schemes.
David?
Sorry, that's a question. I don't think it was this proposal or one of the others about the basement and the gym and the principal rooms argument. If you have a house, what use you make of the internal rooms is up to you. I don't actually get.
That is true. We've got to determine it on its merits as it stands. But in the future, if they were to change those rooms to bedrooms, there would be no need for planning permission. Correct. But on the basis of what we have here,
Just trying to work out the relevance. Doesn't seem to me to make much difference either way. Fine.
In planning terms, there is also an inspector decision of the basement as bedroom space.
appeals that the inspector dismissed the appeal on the basis of poor outlook for these principal rooms in the basement because they were going to be dark and no real outlook. So living conditions were poor, and that sometimes is a basis to refuse things. But you're right, they could change it. Yeah.
And that will be their decision.
Yeah.
Okay, any more speakers on this first application? So it's been proposed and seconded for grant as per the officer recommendation. Those in favour? 3, 4, 5, 6. Make that unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the second one, 040637. That's for the larger house on the southern plot. Does anyone wish to ask comment? Robin?
Yeah, probably looks down and just a question really, not material, I don't think that's why they chopped the boundary off.
Through you, Chair, that's a good question. You never can know with this particular site that's cropping up, because they've had about 30 applications over the past 15, 20 years. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to take everything its own merit. So if something came in to the rear there, we would have to determine it on the basis of what we've approved and what's left, extant and so forth. But yes, I can't answer.
No, okay, fine. But I'll ask the question, thank you.
We don't supply our planning officers with crystal balls.
No.
Not at the moment, anyway.
Sure, did have some.
I'm expecting any sort of answer, but I'll ask the question because it's just odd.
Reasonable.
Yeah, page 110 at 4 with consultants. Also, Capital Building Control raising concern around the access to the site would accommodate fire engines previously burnt down on the site. I would just like to know whether or not the distance can be accommodated by the operation of hoses if needed. I know this is an issue with fire brigades and they take into consideration a distance as whether they can operate the hoses sufficiently to combat a fire. I don't know what the distance is.
Through you, Chair, it's a good question. There are ways and means of addressing the building control issue, getting a building approval. And the lane is pretty narrow. I'm not sure what width it is, but I think it's 3.7 metres to get a fire tender down it, a standard fire tender. So it may not be able to fit down there. But sprinkler systems, if they're the appropriate type, can be used to overcome that. In fact, we do have this on so-called backland plots with central accesses between dwellings at the front and going back to the rear, where they haven't met the 3.7, and sprinklers have been used. But I'm not sure of the exact.
But that would be building regs. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think 45 metres. I'm advised. I think that is a hose distance from the appliance to get into all the rooms that every bit of it.
And that would accommodate this with it.
it's difficult because you need to get the fire tender there in the first place, and that lane is unsurfaced and it's not particularly wide. You can't pass two cars at all. I can't verify the width of that access.
So in terms of,
But they would have to they'd have to meet the building regs to be able to build the properties. Whether it's through us as a council, whether an approved inspector does it.
so if we approve this, it still has to jump over the hurdle of building regs to be like, yeah, okay,
Yes.
fine,
Yes.
thank you.
And we also have to take into consideration the extant permissions. Any more speakers on the second application? Shane?
I propose to give us a recommendation to move it on.
Thank you. Do I have a second? No problem. Thank you. In favour, please. Unanimous. Thank you. And the last application, 04227, which is the smaller house on the southern plot. Anyone want to speak to Alex and then James?
I'll say something. Brenton, Litchett and Upton Ward. I know we're agreeing all of them, but I prefer the second one because it is less imposing. The first application was quite bulky. This one is slightly more civilized, and therefore there's also more access around. I am concerned, as with Councillor Cook, about this odd bit of land at the back that is David Young. But I prefer that one, and I would propose that.
Second, David?
No.
Do you wish to speak to it? You don't have to.
No. I think I go along with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. Just getting assurance into the room around the Corfmullin Town Council on page 143, little restricted covenant. Then on page 154, 16.37, giving an assurance that it has no bearing on its application. Just to have that confirmed, please.
Covenants are civil matters and not planning considerations.
So in just determining the planning, this planning application, there is no comeback on the council. Yeah. So just like that assurance from the officers that that's the case.
Legal opinion?
Yeah, covenants on private land are private matters. So by if you were minded to grant planning permission, it wouldn't overcome the covenant, and unless the precise wording of the covenant said, if planning permission is granted, this covenant falls away. Then there's conceivably a world in which that happens. But first principles know that private covenants on land are not affected by grant or otherwise of planning permission.
Thank you. I just want to get the public domain.
Robin?
Yeah, I'm content to support it. I just say it gives the applicant then what we know of the traders of royal flush, because he's got a choice of 5 properties then he can build.
Well, we haven't agreed this one yet.
No,
so.
I said if it's good, we're giving him the option, or a 5-card trick
Okay.
play on two.
All right. I'm now going to move to the vote before we descend any further. It's been proposed and seconded for grant as per the officer recommendation. Those in favour, please. Unanimous. Thank you all very much. You'll be pleased to know that we have no urgent items and no exempt business. So 12:49. Thank you all very much. I'll close the meeting.
Thank you.